Hello and welcome to the Customer Acquisition Show. I'm your host, Tom Meredith, VP of Marketing, and I'm joined by two of my team, the excellent marketers for Tier 11, Lynn Swayze and Daniel Green. How are you guys doing today?
Good.
We're awake.
Yeah. I'm a step closer to a Hawaiian shirt for you.
I
Added buttons, but no pattern.
We were talking before the show. You're starting to look like you're ready for tool time.
Yeah, I guess I'm starting to get comparisons to Al Borland these days.
Which one do you identify more with, Al or Tim?
Tim, absolutely. On like probably all levels.
Including
I'm
grunting?
pretty handy. Grunting for sure. That's a given. Fixing things, like I'm good at that. I'm pretty handy, but I'm always like cutting myself, or like there's always minor accidents involved, or like takes longer. So, Al was always the one who like knows exactly what to do, does it well. I'm
Nice.
Tim. I'm having fun with it.
And Lynn, how are you today besides being awake?
I'm good. I'm excited to talk about all of the mind exploding things that Meta brought to the table. Otherwise I'm not caffeinated enough. I usually have a cup of coffee and I don't, and so I'm feeling sad.
Mine
I
too.
got half of one.
Well, if you need to take a moment to go make some coffee. But otherwise, we are here. And that was a great segue for me, Lynn, to talk about the Meta Brand Building Summit that happened on October 10th. This was actually their first brand building summit. They've generally focused more on performance. And it's interesting because they would say that they are no longer separate. Brand and performance. Brand performance is what they're pushing out there. And I imagine something that we'll be talking a bit about as well. But what were some of like your initial like big takeaways from the summit?
I think for me, things that stick out to me a lot are numbers. So they kicked it off just, as one would expect, Meta saying, here's what Meta does, and why we're so good at it and why you should use us. But it was pretty staggering numbers. Of just the very first number they threw out was the reach that Meta has, and it's 3.8 billion monthly active users on Meta technologies, which is just crazy, like monthly. So it's a wild the reach that pretty much anybody could have on a Meta platform. I think we all knew it was expansive, but putting that number next to it is pretty crazy.
And the world population is like 8 billion, so they're nearly halfway there.
Yeah, on a monthly basis, you have half the world. And it's like how many of that 8 billion is like kids who don't have social media or something, It's pretty crazy.
How about you, Lynn? Any big takeaways, hot takes?
Of course, the takeaway from the whole thing is partner with Meta, which we are doing, and all of that. I think I found it interesting how insistent they were on that brand and performance are aligned, and how much they were trying to hammer home this idea that you can't skimp on brand. Brand is the long-term strategy. Performance is important, yes, but and they're not separate. Every talk, even the ones that were more controversial that we'll probably hit on. I'm using a lot of kinesthetic words today. I'm sorry, guys. Is the coffee. Even in those talks, it was still long-term, short-term view, brand, performance. How do we balance it? So I don't know, that struck me, again, more kinesthetic words. I thought that was interesting. That was the theme. Even though it says brand building summit, it really was, how are we marrying brand and performance for both short-term and long-term growth?
Yeah, I guess in that sense, this is, if we take a meta view of this Meta conference, and if this being their first foray into like a brand building summit and talking about the shift from performance to brand or brand formance, like this is just their reach an awareness phase of a longer term strategy to make Meta the platform for brand. And I think you said something pretty powerful yesterday when we were chatting about if you plan to be in business 5 years from now, you should be doing brand awareness or brand building at this point. There's no reason not to. I think that was
Byron, I think. That was a Byron.
Yeah, that was Byron.
Oh, maybe.
Basically, like, yeah, stop advertising and stop doing any brand building, any performance if you think you're. The topic was recession, right? But he was like, yeah, if you think you're going to go out of business in a year, stop advertising, but don't stop advertising in a recession, and don't stop thinking long term. You know, have that mindset of 5 years down the road. What are we doing that will build where we'll be in 5 years, and how will your marketing lens and strategy change? If you were thinking, what would change if you were thinking that 5-year lens and had the confidence that your brand would still be a thing in 5 years?
Yeah. I think my big hot take, and I always love coming out of these, or going into them really, of thinking about like where they're trying to lead us as their advertisers. And I was at the Agency Performance Marketing Summit a couple of weeks back, and it really seems to me like Meta is going to a place where they are going to get rid of all like mid-funnel, upper funnel objectives, and you are just going to give it your overall goal, give it all the creatives, and it's going to use its power of machine learning to serve the right ad to the right person. And they've always said like at the right time, but like really wherever they are in the customer journey. So you ideally give it a bunch of upper funnel creatives, mid funnel, lower funnel creatives, and just kind of let it sort it out, which I think is where we're going. They didn't say anything about that yet.
They talked about goals. The one AI guy whose name escapes me, he talked about the importance of selecting the goal specifically, which aligns with what you're saying. But you've been saying this for a while, Tom, so I think you're right.
I'm going to manifest it.
Yes.
So I guess, starting at the beginning, we could talk about some of the different people who spoke and some of the things that are takeaways there. I know the first one was Eva Press, who I believe I'm not going to pretend to know what she does at Meta. So
I don't remember titles. I wrote down names.
Like project manager or product manager of somebody who was a fashion, somebody CPG. They try to cover the whole gamut of it. It was all kind of direct to consumer stuff though, or longer term.
Are you talking Eva Press or Eva Chen? The two Evas back to back. Eva Chen is the fashion one.
Oh yeah. Yeah, she was on with the Tiffany VP of Media, Global Media, I believe.
Yeah, Tiffany & Co. and then U Beauty. She had a little round table with them.
But Eva kicked it off, and I think she talked about some of the stats that you were initially hitting on, Daniel, the 3.8 billion. 63% say they make a purchase based off of some sort of Meta experience.
Yeah, and the numbers that she was dropping are pretty crazy, and it just further proves why, if you're an online business offering services or e-commerce, whatever it may be, you need to be on there. And I think the quote that I wrote down from her was, brands are on Meta because people are on Meta. And it's 270 million people are active on Facebook alone in the US and Canada every month. 70% of shoppers discover new products on Meta, and 58% believe Meta is the place to build relationships with brands. So, I mean, you can't really argue those numbers, right? I think we all knew it. We obviously know it because we're an agency that was more or less founded on Facebook advertising. But yeah, those numbers, they're up there.
Yeah. Which means you can't sleep on Meta. Facebook, Instagram. I mean, I think especially Instagram with the Reels at this point. And we talked about this yesterday that, we see some of our clients where they may say, well, why don't we shut off Facebook? Because it looks like our conversions are on Google or YouTube. But when we do that, we notice that Google drops. And Meta had talked about this too. Facebook. It's so important, and these stats show that the Meta impressions and what people are seeing on Meta is making a difference. Oh, sorry. Even if that's not where the conversion is necessarily tracked. We've had clients where they're like, let's turn it off. And then we turn, like I just said, they turn it off and it affects conversions. Like every platform, you need to be on every platform, across the platforms, because it all makes a difference.
Yeah, it's not even just the advertising aspect, right? It's the social, the engaging. Like it's so important for brands that want to build long-term relationships to be active on these platforms, across the board. And it's hard for a marketing team to do that. I know they didn't really have solutions for that. But something that I think one of your takeaways, Daniel, that you wrote down here, and something that we've talked about quite a bit in the past, is like that first moment with somebody on a Meta platform. Can you explain like how you can utilize your Instagram as that first touch point?
Yeah, I mean, they mentioned, today, and I think we probably all had this, I don't know, same reaction of like, well, duh. Like when this was said, it was today your Instagram profile is more likely to be your consumer's first touch point than your website. I think about that. Like that's so true for me. Unless I'm sitting at my computer, which obviously I am while I'm working and stuff. Even then, I'm typically looking up social sites before I'm looking up a website or going to a landing page or something. Or if I go to a website, I'm scrolling around trying to find their social links. Yeah, I mean, it is pretty crazy. And that just speaks to the importance of building a brand. And part of building a brand that we've talked about before is having a social presence and having that footprint there. Because, without that, like you could be you probably wouldn't be a big brand, but you could be a big brand, have a nice website, great product. And if somebody, one of these billions of people sees your stuff, they go to find you, check out your website. That's great. But they go to your Instagram and you have nothing, or they can't find you. I mean, that says a lot, whether you want it to or not, about your business. And, people will begin to make assumptions about how serious you are about your business or how legit your product is. And then probably start to look at competitors, if we're being honest, and they'll find a competitor's social profile. So yeah, I'd say a big part of building your brand these days for sure is building your social profiles out and making sure you're active and engaging and, consistent with it. Because people are going to look past that pretty quickly if you're not active on there.
Yeah. So almost like social first, and then use the website as backup. Make sure your cart experience, all that is good. We've talked about that, but social first.
Yeah. And you think like they've been adding shopping capabilities over the years to these platforms as well. I mean, they've been around for a while, but half the time you don't even have to go to a website to purchase anymore. Like I ordered some cookies a couple weeks back and I never left company's Instagram page. It was wonderful.
Which part? The buying experience or the cookies?
Oh, the consumption.
Yeah.
Yeah. The buying experience was pleasant, and the eating experience was delicious. So,
but I think if I think about like why social is so important and the Instagram, it's really hard to be inauthentic consistently where like in your website, you only have to really work on that once and you can be as authentic or inauthentic as you want to be, or persuasive is not the right word, like as manipulative as you want to be. It's really hard to do that on a consistent basis in your socials. Like the more socials you put out there, the more likely that is going to be who your authentic brand persona is or your authentic self is. So I think that's why social is so powerful for brand building. I know, Daniel, we had talked about this quite a bit a few months back. We had come across a TikTok creator who was really advocating using your Instagram as your website, building it like your website, because you have those first three across the top that you can pin. Like, what are some of the ideas there?
Mhm.
How to utilize those for building the brand and telling the brand story?
Man, that was a while back. I'm trying to remember this now. You put me on the spot. Yeah, let's see if I can remember this correctly. Their theory was, your three top posts that are pinned are very specific things. What we've done on ours, I know for sure, is we've got, three of our I guess hottest things pinned and most current like evergreen things pinned. So if somebody were to check out Tier 11's Instagram, you'd see like our current thoughts on marketing. We've got testimonials, so what people are saying about the agency, stuff like that. But we didn't go as extreme as what I remember sharing with you, and that was where it is like you limited your profile to like 9 posts, and you got horribly specific with it to the point where like it wrecks my mind, and that's why I say horribly specific, because I'm like, how would we even do that? But you're still posting reels, you're still posting every day. You're just setting time limits on it. So it's got an expiration date on every post, so you post a reel, it's got 24 hours to live on your feed. Then you remove it from your feed and, it stays in your reels tab. But yeah, so they were very specific with these 9 posts that go there, very specific with their bio, their username, all of that stuff. So that when you open it on your phone, everything you see is all that you see, unless you start tapping into like the reels tab and stuff like that. And it was a very specific layout. I'm not convinced that's a solution for everybody. Like that's a lot of manual labor.
That
if
was
you
pretty
are posting
extreme.
every day.
But I think those 3 pinned posts across the top are a really important touch point, and it shouldn't be your 3 most popular videos, I would argue.
Right.
It should really be doing the job of what you'd be doing on your landing page. Like
maybe your story.
Yeah, here's your story. Here's your product and the solution the problem and the solution that you have and who it is serving, and really testimonials, like kind of the same things that you'd put into a landing page, but in video format pinned across the top of your Instagram profile.
Yeah. So currently on Tier 11s, we have, our most recent video of Ralph probably explaining just our thought process as an agency on how marketing works. And it dives deep into brand marketing and performance marketing with our awareness, consideration, conversion sort of methodology we use. Another one we have up there is how to get unstuck in marketing. And that, is Ralph walking through Camp, a system we use as well. And then we've got our testimonials. So it's kind of our most important information that if somebody were to just see those 3, that's what we want them to see and click through.
Nice. All right. So moving on to the next one, the other Eva Chen was joined by Nick from Tiffany and Company and Tina Craig. And I thought it was really interesting how Tiffany has really adjusted who they are as a brand over the last, I think it's probably 5 years. Alexander Arnault came in and kind of really led this transformation from being a stodgy old brand to something that's millennial, even Gen Z focused. And I know we have some thoughts on Gen Z.
Yeah.
Like all previous generations think of the new one.
I love Gen Z.
Yeah. I think, okay, why do you love Gen Z, I guess?
I feel like they are so authentic and dogged towards like the goal of the world they want to achieve and what they want to see, because they have no choice, that they don't let anything distract them. They're honest, even when it's insulting. They're authentically them. They explore being who they are, and they're totally open with, yeah, this is who I am, and take it or leave it. Like I guess it's cringe, as they say, but it's also like a breath of fresh air. And selfishly, I'm pinning a lot of hopes for a better world for Gen Z. I don't know. Yeah, that's what I like. Yeah. And they shared a lot of videos how they were reaching Gen Z and millennials with influencers and new ads that, this is Tiffany.
Yeah. I think the authentic part, I know it's always authentic, but there's something uniquely authentic and about Gen Z and just not conforming.
What they say, like not curated, not, I mean, they'll have aesthetics and whatnot, but not like manicured, polished, more like they show these pictures, right? So instead of like manicured and polished and like, yeah, it looks like it's a real thing, but it's really not authentic versus actually authentic. You see the errors, the cuts are, the editing is different. You know, it's kind of wacky.
Yeah, I think what you see a lot with Gen Z is, I don't know that I'd say it's authentic, but I'd say they utilize things natively a lot more than we used to do. You know, like when Instagram popped up, way back when, you know, it's like, oh, look at these filters we could play with, you know, like let's edit all these photos, let's put this heavy vignette. And that's how we kind of grew up with Instagram, is it was this photo app that you could put filters on and you could do all this fun stuff. And you know,
Present your best
you
self.
introduce right, and you introduce TikTok and Snapchat, and they're throwing filters on there. And now what you're seeing a lot more is just like kids being goofy with TikTok, and that's where I think you start to see that sort of level of authenticity with a lot of Gen Z users. Is they don't, I mean, they have fun with filters and stuff, like, don't get me wrong, that's still part of the platforms, but you just see them posting videos of themselves and, you know, having fun with it. So it is interesting to see like generational differences, even though we're not that far apart. You know, in the world of technology, we're generations upon generations apart practically. We're old people, guys. we're the old farts on social media these days.
Yep.
But yeah, they mentioned Gen Z, and like the things you see is authenticity, experimental expression, and fandom, which I thought was an interesting one. But admittedly, that was a session I had the fewest notes on.
Yeah.
I don't know that there was a reason for that, other than I just don't have many notes.
I think
no notes.
And this is my bias, and I think Gen Z is really kind of embodies how buying happens now. Like everything's so fractured. I think that's what I'd say is Gen Z's fractured. Instead of like a single customer journey, it's infinite customer journeys. Just like I think there's a large spectrum of Gen Z identifying who they are across multiple spectrums. And I think that's really interesting for brands to think about, where you don't have to have a single or a couple personas. You just maybe a spectrum of personas that you kind of identify with and help people aspire to.
Almost like, who is your community? Building that community. If you as a brand, I'm going to use more Gen Z words, like if you know your vibe, if you know your aesthetic, if you know what you're about, it's more like, here's my light, come into my light, join my conversation, as opposed to here's who we think we're targeting. I mean, you have to do that work as a marketer, right? But it's not quite like we're going to find this one person who's 23 who, you know, only does this and, you know, thinks this way about this. Like, it might not be that simple. It might be more nuanced.
I don't know enough to ask this question, but I will anyway. Brands that, I mean, a lot of larger brands are trying to make this jump to be more inclusive and Gen Z friendly, but they often jump too far, too fast. Thinking of like Bud Light and their experiment earlier this year. I don't remember who the influencer was that they used.
I don't remember the name either.
Yeah.
But it was very far from who you traditionally associate with Bud Light. Like, how do we think of, or how do you guys think about like ways for brands to take people on a journey a bit slower and not so fast?
I mean,
I don't know.
was going to say, personally, I don't know that it's something that needs to be encouraged to like make jumps. I think you can make steps. But yeah, to your point, like Bud Light just kind of went for it. And I think there's something to be said for, not forcing things. I think you can make natural progressions towards things, especially as you, I don't know, like analyze and observe and adapt with what's going on in society. But I don't know. That is an interesting question, because
that goes to
it
who
could
you
go either
are.
way for anybody. Yeah, different
Like, who
brands.
are you
it
as
could
a
work
brand?
and-
If that's who you are as a brand, own it, right? Take
Yeah.
the hit, whatever it is, and say, hey, we just don't care. We've done the math. We know who our workers are. We know who we are. We really don't care if you don't vibe with us. There's tons of other beer brands. But if you're wanting to serve everybody, which, going back to the communities and creating communities and fandoms point, I think brands have to be comfortable with just like, there's no baby stepping it, not in this culture with where Gen Z is leading us, this digital culture. I don't think there are baby steps. I mean, maybe, you don't want to whiplash, but if what you're
Right.
presenting online isn't who you are as a brand, isn't what your community is anymore, then, I mean, you have to make a pivot. And I guess, yeah, maybe you can make those pivots and steps, but I think the question is fundamentally flawed, because you got to have a brand personality. And I think that's where a lot of brands are missing the boat, is they don't have a personality. They're a business and they've got stockholders, and people aren't consuming brands like that anymore. People are going, what is this? What is the community? What is the mission I'm being part of? Who are the founders? Is this a name that I want to be associated with? Is this a name I want to wear? Like, does it match my values? I mean, people are like picking aesthetics for their lives and running with those values. I'm cottagecore. It means that I mean, that's an extreme, right? I'm a cottagecore. It means I don't buy these things and I don't eat these things and I wear these kinds of clothes. And it's a lifestyle, and your brand needs to fit within their lifestyle. So I think I disagree completely with, not disagree, but I would shift the perspective completely on its head.
Disagree is good. In the background here is Anheuser-Busch hired Dylan Mulvaney.
That's what it is.
She's an influencer and a transgender woman. She's documented her gender transition on TikTok, and they utilized her for a March Madness ad where she was dressed as Audrey Hepburn from Breakfast at Tiffany's.
Right. What if they had done something of like Budweiser's for everybody, and had one of her, like, representing the population that they feel loves Budweiser, and done something like that, like profiles of, I don't know, I'm making stuff up on the fly. Would that have worked better, you think? Or is it just we're in such a polarized environment that it was wrong choice, wrong time, weirdness? We live in strange times.
I think it probably comes down to a lack of commitment, really. The walk back and not taking the backlash on the chin and moving, kinesthetic word, I guess. Not taking the backlash on the chin and just keep pushing forward and being committed to Budweiser for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, like, was that them coming out saying this is us now, like take it or leave it, or was it them trying to like jump on a bandwagon of sorts? That's not a great phrase for it, but do you know what I mean? Of like, hey guys, marketing, we need to do this. To your point, Tom, because it's like they didn't commit. You're right. I hadn't even thought about that they weren't owning it, which is, I think, is the word you used, Lynn.
Which is worse. Like, that makes it worse. And it's like, oh well, now you just did it for money. More of the rainbow flag stuff that everybody blames brands for. Was like, yeah, you're inclusive when it makes you money, not inclusive in your language, not inclusive in your hiring, not inclusive in your commitment to serving all
raised
consumers.
more questions than it did loyalty, I guess. But yeah, to your question, Lynn, I do wonder if that would have made a difference, if they would have eased into it, so to say, I guess, instead of just making that jump to that point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I think, we're in America. We all know this. You're going to have a big crowd who's going to get pissed about that anyway. Regardless of how it was done, there was going to be backlash.
But there are a lot of different ways to your idea, Lynn, of making it. I mean, that's not inclusive. I'd argue. I would say that is excluding a large part of the original audience. But if they were to do a series of, Super Bowl parties where an inclusive group is coming together, including Dylan Mulvaney and other maybe more marginalized communities or up and coming communities, that would have felt more inclusive and like, oh, we are still part of a family, part of a part of a family who drinks Anheuser-Busch, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. We diverged quite a bit, and I think this is a super interesting topic, especially as brands really are trying to navigate like how they are going to be around in 5 years or 50 years.
Right. And it can change like that. And, I think Byron talked about recession. Nobody, I don't think, really talked about consumer headwinds. We're all kinesthetic today, guys. But like those shifting winds, and, will you pick the right way to represent yourself? I don't know though. I think you got to own it. You got to commit to your identity. And if it's a big shift, it's just going to be painful. I don't know, but the market's changing. Like we're not going backwards, right? The market has shifted. Gen Z, millennials, Gen Alpha, like values are different. And that has to be part of the calculation. We live in a different world.
Yeah. I think one thing that stuck out to me kind of within this conversation, I can't remember if it was Nick or Tina who mentioned this, but I think it was Nick from Tiffany & Co. It's, if innovation's part of your legacy, you can't be afraid to experiment. Ooh. That stood out to me. And I think that's a great point here. And it's probably easier said than done if you're a bigger brand. Like you've got a little more leeway, a little more wiggle room to experiment. But I think that's very true. If you consider yourself innovative or, for the sake of this conversation, inclusive, like you've got to go with that. You've got to own it. You've got to experiment. You can't be afraid to do it. And I think that might have been part of the issue here.
Yeah, I think leaning into that a little bit, like innovation still requires that commitment to the outcome, one way or the other. And if you don't follow through in the innovation, you're not going to know. It's not really an experiment. You're not really going to know you did was right or wrong, or move the brand forward in a positive way, or it's going to lead to longer term success or not. And it takes commitment, and I don't know. I'm going to go.
And you might not get a second chance. Going back to one point that will tie into the short length of what's working that I want to pivot to, and talking about some of those new creatives. They talk about how consumers and digital natives who have grown up on the internet and computers, they have new consumer muscles, and they can spot BS a mile away. They can spot inauthenticity. They can spot these signals that you don't even know you're giving out as a brand. They can spot those signals. So experimenting but not committing, they may never come back to you. And consumers now, they're like, oh, they said this. My daughter did this with Duolingo. Oh, I didn't like their socials that were doing this and really making fun of the community when we gave feedback. We're all language nerds, right? We gave feedback about some of the features and they were making fun of us. I don't want to use that anymore. It's a great app, great product. Yeah. They've been putting a lot of money into it, and my daughter remembers that. She'll probably remember it in 5 or 10 years or 20 years. Bring it up again. Hey, what about Duolingo? No, they did. It's important to own it, be consistent, be authentic, figure out where your authenticity is, because these are digital natives with, like Meta said, new consumer muscles, and they are consuming your brand, your performance advertising, all of it very differently, and you may not get the time of day again.
And I think to that point, like owning the good and owning the bad for sure. You know, if people are able to read through whatever lines are there and, you know, look past the veil of whatever you're putting out there, I think you've got to own the bad, you know, like that's just going to show like, hey guys, like we screwed it up. Like whether you agree with us or not, this did not go to plan. That's on us. You know, like that's authenticity as well, just as much as having your personality out there is authenticity. And I think that's something people, especially younger generations, probably starting, you know, around with ours, I think we're seeing more and more clearly through a lot of these things. There's a fly in front of my face
I
that's
can see it.
killing me. It's attracted to my beard. But yeah, I think that's a big point there, is you got to own the good and the bad alike. That's part of being authentic. That's part of showing that you're a brand with integrity, and that people can trust you even when you screw up, to stand by what you're doing, whether it's success or failure.
So before we transition to what's working now, I have one other, like if we're talking about generations and we're talking about brand versus performance and the time frames there, like should brands be focused on branding for younger generations and performance on older generations who are more likely to buy? Is it?
I don't think so. I think you stay the course, and I think generations are going to buy how they buy. I think the key is you've got to be able to support both buyer journeys.
Accessibility.
Yeah, for sure. So I think that's why, you know, there is such a big push. We are seeing buying tendencies, you know, buying muscles that are different in younger generations, but marketing is changing, but it's also not changing. And I think the key here is that we're realizing the importance of brand marketing more and more. And that's kind of cross-generational in my mind. You know, it spans generations of everybody's going to have that mental availability, like what Byron talked about, of that long-term brand awareness, staying in front of people. You have to do that with everybody, especially, you know, I'm getting older. I'm forgetting more things for sure. Like I'm noticing that. It's like, yeah, keep stuff in front of me if you want me to ever do anything with it. So I don't think it's that different.
Right. Because we're all getting bombarded with information. We are all getting bombarded with so much information and so many brands and so many ads all the time, absolutely everywhere, that we can't keep it on our heads. Tom, how many tabs do you have open so that you can remember to go back to something, right? A lot.
The answer is always more than 200, but usually less than 500.
But so I think it's cross-generational at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Byron said too, like we're always in a battle for attention. That has no, you know, age limit attached to it. We're all in a battle for attention.
This makes me think I should have my wife watch the Byron Sharp section. So I was like, why do I have to remind you 10 times to do something? I only had mental availability at this point, but now I have physical availability to do the action that you want. You can't just market to me once and expect outcomes.
Yeah, let me know how that goes for you, Tom.
Yeah, we'll do.
You could try that first, and then I'll make a decision on if I want to try that as well.
All right, so maybe we segue into Byron Sharp. I think that was more of the controversial or surprising guest for Meta. A little bit of background from him is, I'd say he really is kind of anti-measurement, which seems pretty opposite of Meta. Now, there's a lot more that goes into what he was talking about. Like, what were some of the other main takeaways for the both of you about Byron Sharp's presentation?
One thing that I thought was interesting that he talked about, that I think a few of us who were watching together, like we all heard different things, but he mentioned FAME metrics, FAME. That's what I heard. And I think that's what he said.
Yeah.
But, you know, he said something like, you don't have to measure everything. And then I was asked, like what they do measure. Because to your point, like he is fairly anti-measurement, but he measures things like when, like does his name appear in an article? How often are they written about? These
They're
sort of
universal.
things where they're
They're very
getting
prevalent.
notoriety and like people are talking about them versus, okay, like how much did this cost though? Like what was the click-through rate? Like all of this, that's out the window. He's like, yeah, but are people talking about us? That's what marketing is word spreading. Like, are people then looking at us more and more? So that was kind of an interesting one for me because that's not anything we measure for like tier 11's marketing, is it? Like not that we've ever done. So
No.
it's interesting to look at those sort of fame metrics and take that perspective of like, wow, that is marketing. Like word of mouth is marketing. People mentioning you is marketing. It's just not the marketing you're putting your money behind, which is why most people tend to, look away from it.
Yeah. I think that he is not so much anti-measurement, but that people measure the wrong things. And that
And for the wrong reasons.
There's too much measurement. There's not enough good measurement going on. Like you're talking about like middle, upper funnel, like to people talking about us, or it's not even so much impressions, but it's like other things that are ancillary to your earlier actions that might lead to a result 10 years down the line.
Yeah. He's for sure not anti-measurement by any means. That's not the right term. So yeah, he said we need deeper understanding, but that doesn't mean we have to try to measure everything every day. I think that's a good way to frame his viewpoint on measurement.
Well, if you're thinking long term, we kept pushing this. Yeah, you have to balance the short term and the long term, which was in a lot of the talks. You're not measuring to justify whether or not you're going to do advertising and marketing. And I think so often there's this idea, well, marketing doesn't work or advertising doesn't work at all. And so we have to measure everything just to do what we know are best practices, right? Showing up on social, having a good website, doing, advertising, getting in front of other people's audiences, all of that kind of stuff. We should be doing it anyway. Use the data to help see what works, but keep that long-term view. Because he was asked, like, do you stop advertising like in a recession? He's like, oh no, unless you think your business is not going to be in business in a year, you keep advertising. Maybe you change your budget or you shift some things around, but you don't stop because you're trying to almost like fill that mental shelf. What do you call it? Mental availability? Was that the word you used? Yeah, mental availability.
Yeah.
Where you're staying on their mental shelf long term, and that takes touch points. That takes lots of different angles and stories and reminders. You don't stop that in a recession. You don't stop that when you think, oh no, you don't stop it, right? You have to keep doing it. So measure for the right reasons with the right frame, as opposed to measuring to justify your existence as a marketing team.
Yeah, I think that was pretty interesting. Like, you don't need to measure something that's already proven, and advertising and marketing works for everyone, and that's how brands grow. So do that and don't measure it because it's already been proven. What else did he have here? He talked a little bit about marketing being a forecasting decision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that ties into that. He was talking about that, like what Lynn was talking about. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Like your marketing should be put in place to get you to that goal of where you see yourself. It's forecasting what your business direction is going to be along that path. We were talking about this yesterday. I think so much of marketing tends to be reactive or maybe short notice, like, hey, let's run a sale, or maybe it's Black Friday's coming up, which it is, by the way. So we should get ready for that if you're not already. But, so much of it is this reactive, positioning. So maybe it's, oh man, our numbers are down. Like we've got to figure this out. Market. And it's not looking ahead and being like, okay, let's look at a bigger picture here. Which direction are we heading? Like, yes, is there a dip here? But like, What's our trajectory look like over the past however long? And then where do we want to see ourselves? And then how does the marketing fall into place there?
Mhm.
You know, you're forecasting your position in 5 years, essentially.
Which lends itself to consistency. If
Yeah.
you're thinking in a longer term view, what can we add to marketing, or what can we change that will get us where we want to go in 5 years, and what can we consistently stick to that will get us there in a year, 5 years? As opposed to the reactivity of, well, let's try something new and let's do a lot of, I worked at an agency once who was like, oh, need more sales, so let's do a lot of things. So they do a lot of things, and then they wouldn't do anything with their marketing until they now needed more in their pipeline. Again, a sales-led department. And then they wanted us to do more things. It's like, why can't we just do marketing all the time? Like, I was gobsmacked. Like, why can't we just do marketing all the time, guys? That would make more sense. I'd love to work ahead. What can we work ahead on? And it just wasn't a thing for them. It was so strange. But that's what he's talking about.
Yeah. I was talking to a B2B marketer, and she was talking about how sales and marketing are compensated differently and why that's good. You know, sales gets commission and they get paid for short-term sales. Marketing does not get commission and very rarely performance pay. And that's so that they can be focused on the long-term activities that are going to drive sales in the future, which I thought was a pretty interesting perspective.
Yeah.
But Byron Sharp had a interesting take in that we're thinking about things wrong. We're talking about long-term and short-term in terms of brand versus performance. He's really talking about this idea of mental availability versus physical availability. Can you guys dive a little bit deeper into the differences between the timeframes and the availability and kind of what those are?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest way to relate these two is like your mental availability is going to be people you might consider long-term audience that are going to take a longer time to purchase. Your physical availability is going to be connected to a short-term audience. So those are going to be like your people who are literally ready to buy today. Like maybe it will just take a conversion ad, or maybe they've been looking at you in the mental availability space for a year now, and they're ready to finally make that purchase. So that's probably the easiest way to summarize it. But the mental availability, you know, that's the way we've talked about it with awareness, consideration, conversion. Mental availability is going to fall into that awareness and consideration bucket or buckets, where it's people who are trying to figure out what they want to do. They're probably not going to purchase right away. They're looking into competitors. They're looking into solutions. They're looking up their problem more and more, or they're figuring out they have a problem in the first place. But your goal with the mental availability is to stay top of mind with them and to stay in front of them, so that when they finally get to that physical availability where they're ready to buy, your picture pops up, your logo pops up, your spokesperson pops up, your product pops up into their head. So that's kind of the difference. Mental availability, think that's your long-term. Physical availability, that's your short-term, you know, kind of quick conversion.
It's really interesting to think of it outside of like even just advertising, but decisions you make as a brand or an institution now and the effect it's going to have. He was giving the example of the university he's at. Like the stuff he does now may not be for the person who's reading it. In this case, maybe a pregnant mom. Like it's possibly 17 years down the road that she's going to have a certain affinity towards his university to push a child there that she would have, which is interesting. And especially now, like with universities and how they're allowing, you know, different communities on their campus to drive the brand of the university and how that's going to affect their long-term ability to find the people they want to come to their university.
Yeah.
That goes back to Tiffany's influencer strategy. I think it was Tiffany's, where they go back to like letting the communities decide. They gave products to different influencers and kind of gave them like a rough, like, this is what we want to do. But then let the influencers tell their own story. This is why I like it, or this is what it means to me, you know. And in turn, Tiffany was able to reach a wider audience because they they gave up some control and let the influencers lead the story.
I think Tiffany actually took a very smart approach to expanding into younger audiences. And instead of using influencers, which we talked about Anheuser-Busch using an influencer to try to be more inclusive, Tiffany has done a lot more with collaborations with brands that have a strong affinity towards younger generations. Like they did a Nike collab where they did diamond encrusted Nikes.
Yeah.
They just launched Rimowa suitcase collab where two very high-end companies, but maybe one with a much younger audience. And that's how they've been expanding into this younger audience and building their brand cachet with younger generations is through collaborations.
Collaborations are huge. American Duchess is doing that now. It's a really obscure, like retro historical brand company, like footwear company, right? Really weird stuff. Because again, I'm weird. So they do collaborations with like vintage retro sewers, and people who do like reenacting and whatnot to create a custom like short-term line of shoes with the collaborator. So these collaborations, these collections, limited time, generate a lot of buzz, get new customers who may not have known about them, and kind of letting the influencer drive the collaboration a little bit, and grow both brands.
Yeah, Tiffany, I think has done a good job because they really worked to find creators who shared values. Like they aligned really well with that. But then within that, Tom, you kind of mentioned this, excuse me, that, or maybe Lynn, you mentioned this. They didn't say like, all right, and here's your script. They seeded the product out and just said, hey, do your thing. Like, here's kind of a rough guideline. You know the brand, we know you. This will work. Do your thing. And they gave them freedom to do that, which was not an interesting thought to me, but it's just kind of this quasi revelation of like, well, yeah, that's brilliant. You want to get into new audiences. You can't say, hey, you're in this audience, go speak our language to them.
And that's not authentic, is it?
Yeah,
that's
you need to say, hey, go speak to your audience how you would sell this product to them. So you're essentially like recruiting salespeople and just letting them do their thing. So they really nailed it on how to break into new audiences for sure.
And this kind of goes back to something that Rachel on our creative team says all the time is your brand isn't what you say about yourself. Your brand isn't what you say about yourself. It's what others say about you. And you have to commit to what people say about you is your brand. And you can't control that, whether that's with an influencer or if you're doing UGC with customers. Like what they're saying is what they're feeling. And that's probably something to consider as you evolve your brand. My dog decided to.
Yeah, your dog's chiming in.
Please, that's why you get the flappy gums. Let's see what else.
I think along those lines, though, the very last session, Bianca Bradford led it, but it was with some people from Samsung and Wendy's. That was an interesting one to me too, because they talked a lot about innovation, obviously, but also bringing customers to the table. Wendy's, I think, has one of the stronger, like funnier social personalities out there right now. Like they kind of have this like don't care, but in a very controlled manner attitude about their social, and I love it. Like they even called out Zuckerberg in one of their posts and like all this stuff. But they're big on really like listening to their customers. And a quote that I had from them was, if you start with knowing where your customers want to go, that's how you set yourself up for success. So that it's true, your brand isn't what you say about yourself, it's what others say about yourself. But also your success is kind of built on that as well. And the importance of listening to your customers, whether that's them talking directly to you or them talking amongst themselves out on the social medias or anything like that. Like that's a really good compass for you to make decisions. So Wendy's has been doing a really good job of that. They call their approach it's like go make friends and take them to lunch or something. Like they want to have that sort of a relationship with their customers where they're actually having conversations and customers feel welcomed and heard and valued.
And customer-centric, the name of this. Customer-centric advertising, right? You have to start with the consumer.
Yeah. Even beyond that, one thing I thought was funny that just makes so much sense is Wendy's takes it a step further with their social and their creative, and they play a lot on like funny stuff that's happening on social media. So like, that making fun of people is not the right way to phrase it, but like poking fun at things. So, they purposefully post like the wrong image as if it was like a grandma who accidentally posted like a photo of her recipe instead of something else, or, typing in all caps or like fake searches and stuff like that. Like they lean heavily into what is actually happening on social media that people find hilarious or engaging or entertaining. And they use that in their marketing. So beyond like making customers feel welcome, they're leaning heavily into speaking their language as well, and catching on to trends and, really making strong connections. So I was pretty impressed with Wendy's for sure.
And it's not forced, right? That's an authentic experience that people have of, boomers or older sending, the wrong image or not understanding, and you lean into that as a brand and have some fun with it, and people can identify that with that. And if it's done in an authentic way, it really can make people, be engaged with you. Cool. So we're right about an hour here. Any final thoughts on the overall brand building summit or in general?
I thought it was really good. I mean, there's so much we didn't even talk about today, which is crazy. A lot of notes. But yeah, I mean, it's crazy. Meta did a really good job of stressing what we've been feeling and noticing and implementing here at Tier 11, which is the importance of brand marketing and this brandformance marketing. And I think it's just going to become more and more important to realize that and implement it, no matter what kind of business you are.
Mm-hmm.
How about you, Lynn? Any final thoughts? Just thinking about coffee.
Yeah, I am thinking about coffee. I may be braver in your marketing. I think as a big takeaway, try new things, be braver, try putting more personality. As you do that and learn what's working, you'll get to where you need. You'll get closer to where you need to be. I think it's as an aspirational, like you can do it, like be brave. People want to see personality now. Consumers want to be a part of something. They want to join you in conversations. So have them.
Yeah. I think for me, it's really more like the conversation we've had here today of, we are performance marketers that are learning to become brand foremen. And I really am happy that we are able to have kind of this open conversation and talk about maybe some of these harder topics that brand people have been dealing with that maybe we don't have to worry about so much on the performance side, because performance numbers are really what matters. And brand, you really have to think about people's feelings and how they're going to expand your brand. And so I appreciate you both in general and specifically here today. And I imagine we'll be talking a lot more as we learn a lot more around brand performance. Well, Lynn, Daniel, thank you very much. And if you are interested in working with Tier 11 to expand beyond performance marketing into brandformance or whatever else the version of acquisition expansion looks like for you, where you're reaching new people, head over to tier11.com and click the big pink button, fill out a form, and we would love to chat with you. Till next time, I'm Tom Meredith. Thank you again, Lynn and Daniel.
Yeah, see ya.
Thanks.